Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of History 1120. This week we'll be talking about the 1800s. I know the last few weeks we combined all together, so hopefully you were able to get everything done and turned in. You had plenty of time to do so. If you had any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help any way I can. So when we look at the 1800s, what I found the most interesting from my notes really centers around the United States. So this is a little more US history than what we've done in the past, but do not worry when you go into your discussion post. You can pick any major event, any major person, any major invention of the 1800s to have fun with. So let us begin at the start of the 1800s with good old Napoleon Bonaparte. If you have seen the new movie on Apple TV with Joaquin Phoenix, it's actually pretty good. And I really enjoyed the historical relevance of it because Napoleon was well read and he was a military man. He was someone who was growing up through the military ranks and he was gaining quite a reputation. But in the late 1700s, the good old French Revolution takes place, and he's trying to find his side. He's trying to figure out where he belongs, what he wants to do. And he starts kind of going on some victories and some not battles, let's say, warpath battles type of thing. And he's winning, and he's starting to get noticed and praise. And it actually gets all the way to good old Maximilian Robespierre. And because he was winning and because he was doing so good, he was going all over the place. He was leading his armies through Germany, through Italy, through Egypt, through all those different places. And he was looking really, really good. He was starting to get very well notarized. And it got to the point where he was so popular and the government at the time was so like messed up that in 1804 he makes himself emperor, but he continues to go to war. And once he was greedy. Once he started winning, he wanted more and more and more. And next thing you know, you start losing. Now, always being at war and winning, people are able to be like, all right, we're in. But the minute you start losing, it's no, we want you gone. And that's what happens. He is exiled to the island of Elba. But it wasn't just like they kicked him out and forgot about him. They made him like supreme ruler of this island. So it still gave him a lot of power, a lot of prestige. And so when Napoleon returned shortly after, in like the 18, like later 1814s, early 1815, I'm not surprised at all. He was one of those people that really wanted his country to bow down to him, and for a long time they did. So when he wasn't really stripped of his powers, they just kind of moved him off to the side. He came back full force and he started to gain a lot of following again. But once again, he lost, exiled to St. Helena at this time, and he was given less freedoms, less abilities. He was forced to follow along. And then he eventually dies of sickness, and Napoleon's no more. One of the reasons why Napoleon is so major to US history is because his wars got expensive. If you want to conquer everything, it takes a little bit. And so in 1803, Jefferson wanted to buy New Orleans. So you can see down here, the United States is all right there. New Orleans is a great port city. And Spain and France are kind of going back and forth on who owns it. Napoleon finally kind of locks down on it, and he had grand plans. It was Napoleon was going to get Europe and then hop over to our side of the world and really expand. But Europe was becoming harder and harder to control and solidify. And so he kind of was like, forget about the New World, forget about the stuff by the United States. I don't care anymore. So when Jefferson sent Livingston and Monroe to Napoleon and be like, hey, $10 million to buy that like New Orleans area, the fact that Napoleon came back and go, give me 15 million for the entire Louisiana territory. 530 million acres for $15 million. It was all of a sudden like you had to. And what's always funny is like the United States didn't really have a precedent or really an idea of how to buy land like that. Jefferson couldn't just sign a check and move on. He had to get Congress's approval. He had to work with the people at the time, but it was an offer you could not refuse. It was too good. And so they quickly kind of made quick ideas, quick movements, and ran with it. And the United States basically doubles overnight, if not more. And Jefferson's like, I need to figure out what I just bought. So he sends good old Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. You can see those two gentlemen there. And they go on an 8,000-mile journey on the Missouri River, upstream, by the way, no motor. So they were rowing their boat upstream and all the way to the Pacific Ocean. As you can see, they got to the border and they're like, let's keep going. So this territory actually is not controlled by the United States. It's controlled by a different country. And so we were kind of by definition trespassing, but it was a quick, hey, how's it going? And then back to US territory. During that exploration, they documented everything and were able to find a lot of species, a lot of plant life, talk with the Native Americans. And thanks to Sacagawea, the expedition became very successful. She was a great guide, great translator, and it made everything run a little bit more smoothly, even though a 8,000-mile journey back in the 1800s, nothing's going to be that smooth. So with the United States expanding, we were trading with Great Britain, France, Spain, anyone and everyone. But you got to remember it, in the early 1800s, France was a major enemy of Great Britain. Like the fact that the United States would even look at France really made Great Britain angry and not not really good for them. So they started to just take our ships. They would literally use the Royal Navy, and if they found a U.S. ship, it would be, you are now part of the Great Britain Navy. Congratulations, let's go. They would start attacking those ships, taking the goods, and eventually in 1812, the War of 1812 broke out. Clearly, the naming rights were pretty easy to go with. US and Native Americans were starting to fight more because the British were kind of helping them put pressure on it. And here's the thing, both sides declare war, but England's fighting France, a lot closer threat than the United States. And let's be honest, at this time, a lot more major threat than the United States. So they weren't really ready to go over. In the United States, in 1812, we can talk all the game we want, but we weren't ready to go to a war. We just barely won the Revolutionary War. Let's see here, a couple decades earlier. So they're not really ready to take place in the next. And so few skirmishes, battles take place, some major victories for both sides. The White House burns down, the Star Spangled Banner is written. Really not much major changes are taking place though. We'll gain land, we'll lose some land. We'll move over here and then we'll be pushed back. Great Britain finally beats Napoleon in 1814 and now are able to send over their full forces and more troops. And they start to see the idea and really how worth it is it going on in that sense. The United States kind of seeing the writing on the wall as well, like, oh, this really wasn't worth it. We're not really getting much out of it. They signed the Treaty of Ghent, ending the war and making sure that both sides kind of solidify their borders, especially the United States-Canadian border. But in 1814, we took a little trip, and the Battle of New Orleans is won with Andrew Jackson getting the victory and a lot of notoriety because of it, extending his career and allowing him to have that just kind of resistance with the good old Native Americans and the Indian Removal Acts and all of the Trail of Tears that we'll see kind of leading up to our last topic, which is the Civil War. If you're talking about um, U.S. history, the 1800s history in general, the Civil War must be mentioned. In the United States at this time, they're expanding, and a lot of issues are uphold, and slavery is right at the center of things. Time and time again, you can see that the United States sign compromises, fight over it. Basically, we're pushing off what the Civil War was really all about to try to save as much of the US as they could. But eventually, with the election of Lincoln, it reached its boiling points. States start to secede, and Fort Sumner takes place, and war breaks out. Now, we could go through all this and make this lesson really, really long, but you know those battles. And if you want to break it down in your discussion post, go for it. You can see people like Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Meade, and many, many, many more generals and people during the Civil War get their fame, get their ideas, and they rise up out of it. As we all know, the North finally wins the war. The Emancipation Proclamation ends slavery, and the United States is now ready to start mending itself. Abraham Lincoln's like, well, the next step is very critical, aka Reconstruction. He had his version of Reconstruction, but unfortunately, he is killed before it really gets started. And the presidents that take place afterwards have their own version of said Reconstruction. And it goes all around. And you see some people being harsh, some people being soft. And there's that question time and time again, always circling around. Did it happen? Was it proper of the Reconstruction that did take place? So you can have your opinion and you can discuss that in your discussion post as well if you want to choose that type of thing. Wrapping up the 1800s, the United States decides to go to war with Spain. Cuba was trying to get its independence. Puerto Rico was in this struggle, and many of those Spanish islands in the Caribbean are kind of struggling. And Spain is trying to keep its hold, but you can kind of see that writing on the wall as well as Spain kind of moving away from colonizing that territory. So the United States enters the war of Cuban independence, and kind of the Spanish American War is born in the late 1800s. Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders push up the hill and make claim for him. And eventually, the United States gets some territory, pushes Spain out of the Americas, and the world as we see it gets a little more, or the borders of the countries get a little more as we see it today. So, like I said, there's tons and tons of stuff that happened in the 1800s. This one focused more on US history. When you do your discussion post, if you want to build on an idea I talked about, find a specific person I talked about, whether it's US history or somewhere else in the world, go for it. Have fun with it. And as always, good luck.